Hi everybody, my name's Jonathan Mann and welcome to episode 2 of Pulse, a space to reflect on conducting, music making and all the decisions that go into creating an amazing performance. Last week we discussed the sort of whole life of a conductor, the activities of a conductor, going right from sort of the invitation of a concert all the way through to the rehearsal process and then the final product itself, the performance, and then even what happens after that. But today, after listening to a lot of your feedback over the past week, we are going to focus in on the rehearsal process of being a conductor. This is probably, really one of the most challenging aspects of being a conductor. I don't think I've got all the answers, so I'm really looking forward to having your feedback during the session. And thank you to those of you who have already sent in your questions. So really what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just share a little bit of my thoughts on the aspect of rehearsal as far as conducting goes, and then we'll look at some of those questions. So the first thought that I just wanted to put out to all of you today was, what is the purpose of a rehearsal? So if we were to actually think about this from the side of an actual player in the ensemble, a musician in the ensemble, they're coming along to the rehearsal for the purpose of playing with other people and making music. And that sounds very, very sort of basic, but effectively that is why people go to rehearsal, to play and to make music with other people. Sounds basic, but it's very easy as conductors to forget that is the purpose of a rehearsal. Music making should be the absolute number one thing that we should be thinking about when we are in our rehearsal rooms. So the problem is that there's just so many other things to think about and that are going on during a rehearsal that it's very hard to stay focused on that absolute fact. Now, of course, I know that so many of you who will be watching this are involved with different ensembles, conducting different ensembles, which have completely different scenarios as to how they rehearse. Some of you might be working once a week over a long period of time, and then there's a performance. Some of you might be doing a concert which has only a single rehearsal on the day of that concert. Some of you might be having maybe 2 or 3 days of intensive rehearsals, perhaps 3 to 6 hours of rehearsal a day, and then a concert. And then there could be, of course, many other combinations of these types of timescale for rehearsal. So the things that I'm going to suggest, of course, you have to kind of apply to your own circumstances. But effectively, whatever rehearsal we have to do, we always have to think in a sense of trying to provide our group with the right balance of ingredients. Now, I've written a little bit of a list here. So, yeah, contrasts are important. We only get a set number of hours to rehearse. Some of you might only get an hour or even less, but then it could go up to say 3 hours, which has a short break in between, something like that. So the time that we have is so important that we use it to the absolute best that we can, and that we don't waste that time. So time management is a hugely important aspect of our job as conductors. We have to be really organised with time, and we have to pace the time. And contrasts are really important for people when we're thinking about time in a rehearsal. That could be what repertoire you're actually going to rehearse, whether you stick to one piece for the whole of your time, or you contrast by doing, say, different movements of a piece, contrasting movements, or you do, say, a couple, 2 or 3 contrasting pieces in a rehearsal to keep that sense of contrast. Then another aspect of the rehearsal is how much you look at the big picture of a piece. You let the ensemble play large sections to get a sense of the bigger picture, or you start honing in on details and working in very small chunks of music, and really getting into the details. So there needs to be contrast and balance between those two aspects. Technical instruction and musical instructions, there needs to be a balance between those. It's no good just providing technical instructions without any sense of the musical ideas behind it, and vice versa. Sometimes we can't just explain a musical idea without a way of implementing that, without giving some instructions as far as technique goes. And then, of course, finding a balance between letting your ensemble play and stopping. So we've always got to be finding these contrasts in our rehearsal. It's always a fine balance. And of course, verbal and non-verbal communication. So again, I go back to that question for those of you who are joining now, which was, I asked, what is the purpose of rehearsal? And again, if we put ourselves back in the shoes of our musicians, the purpose of coming to a rehearsal for them is to play with other people and to make music. And it sounds so straightforward, but sometimes we as conductors forget this. And I always like to ask my students, if you're working with an ensemble regularly, to video your rehearsals, so that you can actually watch them back. Once you get past the initial sort of shock of having to watch yourself back, these can be so illuminating. And one thing that's really good to do is to just put a timer on and time how much of your rehearsal is spent actually playing the music and how much of your rehearsal is spent stopping and talking to your ensemble. And sometimes that can be quite revealing. The very famous, legendary football manager, Sir Alex Ferguson, who was, the great football manager of Manchester United, was involved in writing this really wonderful book about, sort of 10 years ago, called Leading. I'd highly recommend it to all of you who are working in roles where you have to be a leader. And it really goes into so much detail on how he handled managing Manchester United, not just the actual players of the football team, but how he really sort of oversaw the growth and expansion of that club over many years, how he was able to build new teams time and time again, and all the decisions and the skills that it required to lead at that kind of level. So you can really learn so much about leading from that book. And what I wanted to say was there's one phrase that he used in the book, which was, God gave us 2 eyes, 2 ears, and 1 mouth. And I think for conductors, it's very, very easy to forget that, especially in rehearsal. It's very easy to overtalk during rehearsal. I mean, even now on this live stream, as a conductor, I feel uncomfortable talking this much. But it is really, really important to remember that you've got 2 eyes, 2 ears, and only 1 mouth. For conductors, we should be obviously using our ears in rehearsal. All musicians are listening all the time and trying to understand what we're hearing, react to what we're hearing. But the eyes is actually quite an interesting one. How much, as a conductor, do you use your eyes? They're so crucial, and particularly in rehearsal, the use of the eyes can be amazing and can enhance our non-verbal communication. Ultimately, we can't speak in a performance. So the rehearsal room is the perfect place to start to develop that relationship with our groups of non-verbal communication. The more of it we can do in our rehearsals, the better. And then that communication can then filter over into the performance and can lead to those sort of really magical moments that can only happen in a live performance. So for those of you who struggle with the communication with your eyes, the famous phrase, have the score in your head not your head in the score really applies. I know it's such a cliche to say that, but it's so important. The preparation you have done on the music before you go in front of the orchestra allows you to have the freedom to get your eyes out to your musicians. And even if the orchestra don't look like they're looking at you, they can really sense it when a conductor is really trying to make contact with them. Of course, players have to be looking at their music. They have to be aware of all the other players around them in the ensemble. It's the peripheral vision that they're using to actually see our movements the majority of the time. Obviously, they do look for those crucial moments where they absolutely have to, but most of the time it's on peripheral vision. So they can really sense it when a conductor is really engaged with them, even if they might not be looking at us. And it really does enhance your gestural language, your physicality, if you're able to really engage with the different sections of the orchestra with your eyes. The other aspect to the eyes is, of course, you're able to observe so much in the room. You can observe whether the orchestra's restless. You can observe the sort of attitude of different sections. You can observe the bowings. The things that you're hearing that maybe you want to change. If you're also looking, you might see a solution to a problem. I can't stress enough the importance of the eyes, the ears, overall in your rehearsals. The mouth, it's better to keep it shut and to communicate non-verbally. Obviously, that's not possible. We do have to speak to our ensembles, and our ensembles want to hear from us. They can't just 80 people in an orchestra can't all mind read exactly what you're thinking and feeling 100%. So we have to speak. We have to share what we think about the music and what we're hearing with the ensembles that we conduct. They expect that. But the question is, how effective can you be when you have to speak? Ideally, if you can shorten what you say to maybe like one sentence, to really get your point across, or even if you can say what you want in just maybe 3 to 5 words, broken English is fine, but if you could just get your point across as succinctly as possible, this is the challenge for all of us when we're in rehearsal. The other aspect is, if possible, if when you stop the orchestra, you can say more than one thing, so maybe you might have 2 or 3 comments that you could give to different sections of your ensemble at in one go and then restart. That's much more effective than just every time you stop just giving one point. Now let's see what else I've got on my list here. Yeah, and I mean, obviously, if any of you have other things you could share about really effective verbal communication in your rehearsals, please do write a comment in the chat, send a wave, send a like. It's great to see people joining. So yeah, we've talked about how important it is. The non-verbal communication in rehearsal is super important. The use of the eyes is super important. Get your head out of the score. But now here we are, and we're talking about the actual times when we do have to use verbal communication, which is, super important. So, less words, we've already talked about that. Several points at one go rather than stopping every time and giving one point. Another really important thing is to wait for silence before you say anything. Normally when we stop conducting, because we want to say something, there'll be a little bit of time whilst all the players realise we've stopped for the silence to be there in the room. Obviously, if there's a sort of echoey acoustic, there needs to be time for that to clear. Maybe some people have to talk, briefly about bowings or something else that came up. So there'll be a little bit of sort of noise going on there. So just have the patience to just wait for silence before you speak, so that everybody can really hear you clearly. Make sure when you speak that you fill the room with your voice. Your voice should project throughout the room, to the back, to the corners of the room. Even if you're talking to the second violins, the tuba player should be able to hear every word that you're saying. They should feel included. Everybody in the room should feel included, even if the information that you're giving doesn't necessarily apply to them. When you speak, exaggerate the consonants and elongate the vowels, especially for somebody like me who's quite shy actually. And I'm not somebody who would really want to project my voice. I really have to practice that, so that when I'm in front of a large group, I really do exaggerate my words so that it's really clear, especially, as I said, if you've got an acoustic that is quite boomy, so that everything can really be heard clearly the first time round. You don't want any confusion from the large group of people in front of you. So exaggerate those things, particularly when you say a bar number or a rehearsal figure. It's really important that those come out really clearly. And for example, say if you had to go from letter C and maybe it was 8 bars before, a really good idea actually is to say something like, okay, everybody, please could we find letter C and please count back with me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 bars. By doing that, you give everybody the time to find it. Everybody can actually count with you. And it's much more likely that everybody will be clear on where you have to start and you won't have to repeat yourself. Stuff like this just makes such a difference. It takes the confusion out of rehearsals and it allows you to really flow well. Stay in your center when you stop to say something. Now, what do I mean by that? When we're actually conducting, when the music is going on, when the orchestra is playing, the energy in the room, the focus and concentration in the room is kind of up here on the graph. As soon as we stop to say something, there's this void. Vroom. It sort of drops like this. And then as soon as we start again, it goes back up. And as soon as we stop, it drops. And it drops because when we stop, we kind of relax. And then we speak. If the energy that you conduct in, if when you stop, you remain in that place in your body, in that place in yourself of focus, of concentration, and you actually speak into that place of energy, you will keep the energy. Of course it will drop a little bit, but you will keep these dips from dipping too much. And in the span of a large rehearsal, if the energy is dropping and coming back up and dropping and coming back up like this constantly, it can become very, very tiring for people. So and it's also an aspect of concentration for us, to actually be able to stay in the poise and energy and focus that we've practiced when we're actually practicing and working physically with our non-verbal communication. Can you remain in that place when you're speaking? Let me know how you're finding these comments. I hope they're useful. And if you've got any others to add, please write a comment in the chat box and I will definitely read it out. Oh, this is a good one. Talking to the ensemble after they're ready to play. So maybe you've stopped and you've said a few points to the group, and then you say, okay, everybody, let's start again. So you get ready to conduct, everybody's ready to play, and you're about to give the upbeat to start, and then you go, oh no, one more thing. And that is, can you imagine how frustrating that is if you're playing in the orchestra, to be ready to play and then suddenly, oh, one more thing, they relax. If that happens, it subconsciously it can be frustrating. It can lead to the orchestra getting less focused, a little bit of unrest in the room. And it's something I struggle with actually, because we've got so many ideas, and it's very easy sometimes to forget something we want to ask for. So what I try to do in that situation is, of course, I would actually apologise. Oh, I'm so sorry, I knew you were ready to play. And then I would just try to remind myself, okay, just try not to do that later on. It's really important to catch yourself in those moments, because they can affect the flow and the concentration in the rehearsal room. Talking while the ensemble is playing, or singing while the ensemble is playing. These things, people do this all the time. Maybe you talk over the ensemble. They might be playing something that's quite quiet, and you think that talking over the ensemble is fine in this moment. Well, maybe it is. But perhaps there's still a few people that couldn't quite hear what you were saying, because they're in the middle of, they're concentrating on playing, they're reading their music, they're listening to everybody else. And then over the top, they hear this noise of a conductor speaking to them as they're playing. Now, I would just personally think it would be so much better to just wait until you've got silence and say what you've got to say, so that everybody understands the first time round, rather than saying over the top, and then maybe when you do next stop, somebody saying, oh, was there something that you said, when we were playing, Again, it's just about being effective and making sure that when you do say something, you only have to say it the one time and people actually understand. Let's see, what else do I have here? There's so many things. I think I'm going to have to go into another page. Let's have a look. Here we go. When you're giving instructions, everybody, try to combine your musical ideas with a technical instruction. Of course, if you're working with a really fantastic high-level orchestra, professional ensemble, a lot of the time you can literally just ask for the musical idea and they will just adapt straight away. But, if you're working with, it could even be a professional orchestra. It could be a very high-level youth or community orchestra or community group. There will need to be, from time to time, the aspect of giving some information about how to play something, whether that's a part of the bow, whether that's a kind of articulation, It's always so much better when giving a technical instruction that it's linked and connected to the musical idea. Getting people away from thinking about technique, whatever that means, and thinking about music and imagination is so much more inspiring. And the thing that we really have to always think about is, how are we keeping our ensembles focused on music making and playing together? So if you can connect your technical instructions with a musical idea, it's a fantastic combination. Let me know how you're enjoying this, guys. Send me a wave, write a comment in the chat box. If you've got any questions about rehearsal, let me know. We're covering quite a lot here. We've talked a little bit about the importance of non-verbal communication in the rehearsal room, and we are now talking about when you actually do have to speak, some kind of golden rules that can really help you to be efficient and effective. This is a good one I wrote down. I think it's a good one. Stay patient and encouraging. Now that sounds, like that should be quite straightforward. But for myself and for all of you who conduct, I know that it can be quite difficult to stay patient and to stay positive in front of your ensembles. We've got so many musical ideas. We're limited by the clock. And we're trying to get the group to be at their best for performance, and sometimes that pressure builds, and it can be easy to become frustrated. It can also be very easy to become negative with our feedback to the group. But I would really caution at that. There's absolutely no need to ever be negative with an ensemble. You never ever need to tell an ensemble what they've done wrong. It's a complete waste of time. It's much better, rather than saying, oh, you didn't play quiet enough there. What's the point in saying that? Why don't you just ask for what you would like? Just say, please, can we play really quietly here? You know, there's no point in using negatives. Always go for the positive. However, although I say not to be too negative, there's also a danger in being too positive. If you give too many compliments, people might start not to believe you, you know? I've seen conductors do this time and time again. They think that by constantly complimenting their ensembles, that's somehow gonna help them play better. But we need to be honest musicians. We need to be able to be honest. We need to work. We need to focus on the music. We need to get the music as good as possible. That's not to say that if you hear something that was absolutely wonderful, that was genuinely really fantastic, that you don't actually acknowledge it and you say, thank you, that was wonderful. It could be an amazing trumpet solo that you heard. Wow, that was unbelievable. Thank you so much. Because that does really build the morale of your orchestra. But if you're continuously praising them and they can hear, oh no, there's still things that we need to improve, empty compliments is not so good. So be careful. Don't be negative, but don't be overly positive. And always talk, when you talk to your group, use we instead of I. You can always say, hey, can we do it like this? Is so much better than saying, I would like this. You know, involving the whole group. This is all about group psychology, and this is the whole point that musicians go to rehearsal, is to play with other people and to make music together. We are part of that. We. That is the word. So before we get on to some questions that I received, if you have any questions about rehearsal, maybe you've been in a rehearsal recently that you've been conducting, and maybe there was a scenario that came up and you were just wondering, how I just don't know what the best way to solve this was, or did I do the right thing? Or it could be something completely different to rehearsal. Maybe it's something you might not know it so much about what goes on in the rehearsal room, how the process happens. Please do send me a question, and we'll address it. But the final point that I had here, for all of you who are conductors and who are involved in rehearsals, is to say to you, remember that you are a performer. You are a performer. Conducting is performing. You're an artist, and that we are part of this whole thing with our ensembles. It's very easy in the rehearsal room to take on this completely different persona. I know that we have to be more forensic. We have to really listen and put things together and, help and try to solve problems. And there's definitely so many different aspects that in the performance are obviously, that's simply we're just performing the piece. But try to find the balance. Don't forget that you're a performer. The ensembles you conduct, they want to feel in rehearsal that they're making music with you, that it's not some kind of lesson, that you're not just educating them or coaching them how to be better. This is a collegial, inspirational thing about making music that ultimately ends up with us going out on stage with our ensembles, hopefully at the top of their game, ready for the performance. So let me come to some questions now that I got. I got some really fantastic questions, and if you have any feedback on these questions and my answers as well, please do write it in the comment box, or send me some other questions as we go through. So this is a really good question that I received. I'm not going to say who it is because I obviously don't want anybody that they work with to know it's them. But this is the question: how honest should we be as conductors with our groups? So this conductor has been working with their orchestra for 4 seasons now, so they obviously know this orchestra very well. And currently they're working on a specific piece which isn't going as well as they would have expected or hoped. So in a recent rehearsal, they found themselves being brutally honest with the orchestra about the level that this piece was at, I guess. And this was an instinctive reaction. This wasn't a pre-planned thing. It just came out in that rehearsal situation that they decided to be brutally honest with the progress of the work in question. And after the rehearsal, the reaction from the orchestra was very much split, 50-50. So some of the orchestra were happy that the conductor had kind of given them a kick up the backside to help them to sort of improve. And then the other half were quite demoralised by the conductor's reaction and the brutality of the honesty given in rehearsal. So how do conductors deal with these unexpected musical situations? Is honesty in this manner, being brutally honest with our groups, the best policy? So it's a really difficult question. So I've certainly faced this myself before. Firstly, it seems for this conducting question that it's really coming from an honest place. Like, you've known this group for a while and you really care about this group. You really care about the music and you really care about the concert that you're giving. So your reaction came from a really honest place. And I feel like that's absolutely fine, and that if these kind of reactions come from an honest place in us, that the ensembles that we conduct will respect that. They know you, they know that who you are, the musician that you are. They've got respect for you. I mean, you've been there for 4 seasons, you've done so many projects with them, so they have respect for you. And I think that they could definitely see, even if some of them did find it demoralising, they could definitely see that it was coming from a good place. And I think that's it. You need to be authentic to yourself. As long as you're putting the music first and you care for the music and you're really putting the composer first, as long as everybody can see that and you're being respectful about it, honesty is absolutely fine. This is the tough part about being a leader, is sometimes we have to make decisions and we have to say things that are uncomfortable for people. That group you've been with for 4 years, you have their trust, you trust them. In that safe environment, honesty in this case, I think, is absolutely fine. Would I do that if I was visiting an orchestra for the first time? Probably not, and yeah, so it really depends on the situation. You need to know that it, in a sense, that it is the right situation to be like that. If you're going somewhere as a guest, in a sense, the general standard of the ensemble is not your responsibility. So to really be kind of being brutally honest about the playing and holding them to some kind of standard in that way is not necessarily needed. You just have to try to do the best you can for that time that you're with them, but just try to keep things with a good atmosphere in a sense. So in a sense, there doesn't need to be such a potentially controversial situation. What I would say to everybody is who's conducting that these feelings and this honesty, it has to come from a good place. It has to come from a place where we're totally caring for the music and we're completely open to the orchestra. Don't bring your own personal struggles or emotions into the rehearsal room. If you're, because this is the thing, and I'm gonna turn this on its head now, actually, to say that the other way to think about this is conductors really shouldn't have any expectations for any rehearsals we do. Why should we? Ultimately, it's the musicians in front of us who are playing the music. They are the ones that will do this, For us to put these pre-planned or pre-programmed expectations on what we think they're going to be like or what we think they should be able to do in the next rehearsal before it's even started is leading us down a dangerous alley, in a sense. It's leading us down an alleyway that could lead to us being disappointed, to us being frustrated. So actually, going to rehearsal with no expectations is a better policy. Obviously having a general plan of what you want to try, what music you want to work on is a good idea. But not necessarily having a plan on where they should be as far as their ability or their progress by the end of the rehearsal. There shouldn't necessarily be an expectation on that, but having a sort of rough plan of what you want to cover, what music you want them to have seen, that's a better way. But remember, now I'm going to turn it on its head. We could say an orchestra is only as good as their last concert. We could say an orchestra is only as good as their last rehearsal. We could then say a conductor is only as good as their last rehearsal. There's no guarantees that the next rehearsal is going to be as good as the previous one or is going to progress as well as the previous rehearsal. This is why I say it's much better not to have any expectations or place any on anybody before rehearsal. You don't know what's happened to the orchestra during the week. You might be going to an orchestra in another country where they just found out that their salaries are going to be cut next season. Or you might be going to another orchestra where one of the musicians is going through a serious personal matter. We don't know what situations they're coming to rehearsal with. So that's why I say it's best not to put any expectations in that sense, but just to have prepared well and to be open to making music and to trying to make the best music possible in every rehearsal. So I hope that helps. And if any of you who've joined during my long answer to that question have any feelings about these kind of aspects to rehearsal, or you have any questions, let me know. Send me a wave, send me a like. It's great to have you. Another question that came in was, how do you approach working with an ensemble for the first time? So this could take us another hour. Which obviously we're not going to have for this session, but I think we're definitely going to have to cover this in more detail in the future. But I'd love that for those of you that are conductors who are joining to share how you prepare to meet an orchestra for the first time. It basically is like a blind date. We have no idea what's gonna happen. I mean, you might have heard the orchestra before, you might have heard of the orchestra before, you might know one or two players in the orchestra, so you might have a little bit of an idea what they're like, but until you actually stand in front of them on the podium and give that first upbeat, downbeat, you are not going to know really what it's like, what the animal, which is that organism in front of you, is going to really feel like until you stand right there. So the preparation to actually be in that place to give that first upbeat, downbeat is really important. Know your music as well as possible if it's the first time. That you shouldn't be having any doubts or insecurities about the music itself. You really should know what you want, how you want the music to sound, what ideas you've got to share with your with the ensemble in question for the project. That at least you've got that as a kind of anchor to hold on to when you're going to be going in to this situation of complete uncertainty, which is a first rehearsal with a new orchestra. Hopefully there's somebody in the orchestra that you know, even if it's just one person that you've met somewhere else, that can make a big difference. But if it's a complete sea of new faces, then obviously the way that you present yourself when you walk in, having a calm, confident manner, saying hello to some of the principal players is always good. For me personally, I don't like to enter the rehearsal room too early. Maybe if I get to the rehearsal venue early before the orchestra's even arrived, I can go into the rehearsal venue and actually go and stand there at the front and just get a sense of the space, feeling how it will be to be in the space, and then I'll go out. The orchestra will obviously come in to warm up, and then I leave it quite last minute before coming in so that I don't have to sort of be in the room too much before getting up to actually conduct. And then it's basically, for me, as simple as once they've tuned and I've shaken the leader's hand or whatever, just saying good morning, it's wonderful to be here with you. Let's start with whatever the piece is. And then for the first rehearsal, the majority of it I will spend really just conducting, not speaking too much, playing big sections of the pieces. Sometimes I'll just play, if say we've got a symphony on the programme, I'll play the whole piece through, just so we really get a sense of the piece as a whole. And that gives me time to use my eyes, to use my ears, to really get a feel for how this organism in front of me reacts to my gestures, how they sound, what personalities I can get a sense of, who is really responsive to me, who maybe is a little bit more difficult to get their attention. So it's this, and obviously from their side, they're also testing me out. The best way to test one another out is through the non-verbal communication. Then, once we played a bit, then gradually I'll start to rehearse. Maybe we will have spent the majority of the first half of the rehearsal just playing and getting a sense of this non-verbal side of things. And then after the break, that's when I might start to work a bit more in detail on some things that I really want to get across. So for example, like I'm not going to name the country, but I went to one orchestra where I was playing a specific piece, and they could play it so well. All the notes were really good. They knew the piece really well, but as far as the sound quality of this orchestra, went, they played with a very bright sound, with a very sort of sharp, concise attack. And my concept for the music was the complete opposite. I wanted a much rounder sound, more sostenuto, more legato. So that in the first rehearsal was my priority. So we played through the piece, and then after that I really started with my words very concisely, just to say, please, more legato, or warmer sound, very basic things like that. And then we would play again, and I'd use my physicality, and gradually the sound changed. That was my priority in the first rehearsal. And I think it's really important when you do start to rehearse in a first rehearsal that you make it sound better. Whatever you do in that first rehearsal, you have to make it sound better, because you've got to gain the orchestra's trust in that first rehearsal. If they know that the conductor is able to really take them through the music, that they're clear with their gestures, that they're really communicative with their eyes, and then they can hear and they can change the sound of the orchestra. As long as you can do those two things, and you can do it in a respectful, friendly manner without wasting time, then you've done a good first rehearsal. And then after that, the relationship can deepen. It becomes a little bit easier. You can go into more detail, you can push them further, and gradually take them through to the performance. I'm sure I've left something out there about first rehearsals. They are really, really hard. But again, we always just have to try our hardest to remember what is the purpose of a rehearsal. The players come to play with one another and make music. And that's why we're there, to facilitate the making of the best music possible. Sounds so easy when I say it like that, but it is just so difficult. So it was great to have those questions. Thanks for sending them in. If any of you have any more questions that come up after watching this session, please do write them in the comments, send me a direct message, or you can contact me through my website. Next week, we are going to dive in to a little bit of the activities of preparation before we actually reach our first rehearsal. So there's going to be two pieces that I'm going to give as a choice for next week that we could look at. Watch out. Tomorrow I'm going to reveal those two pieces, and we'll have a vote on which one you'd like us to discuss next week. So thank you so much for joining. I'm wishing you all a great week, and looking forward to our next session next Sunday, the same time, 7:30 p.m. Thanks for tuning in. Bye for now.